What do you do when you have two swords from two different companies that at first glance look remarkably similar? Are they the same sword? Or is this a situation where there can only be one?
There can be only one.
What we have here is the Albion Mercenary here on the top, the green handle. And below it, we have Swordier's Type XVIIIc model, which is the SWMZ-1004. There have been several comments that these two swords are almost exact copies of one another. Are they actually? I think there's enough to be said about each one of them that they are distinct swords, and we are going to get into that. But whether or not that distinction is enough for you, you'll have to make that decision for yourself, and hopefully through the end of this video, we might be able to come to a bit of a consensus together on it. First thing I want to point out with each one of these is the handle construction and the fittings themselves. And this is where it's a little strange for me, because the fittings themselves are, I want to say, generic in a sense, because they're both using an upward swept cross guard and a scent stopper pummel. Neither one of these is unique to any one sword, and honestly, there are a plethora of different swords that have the exact same fittings, or at least very similar. Don't get too fixated on the grips as well. They do look like in this particular set that they have different grips, and they do. But this is a wasted grip, and this is Albion's earlier grip for the Mercenary, and I forget the name that they use for it. It's very nice, it's very ergonomic in the hands, but Albion also offers a wasted grip on their Mercenary that you can order at when you actually go to place an order with them. In fact, I actually have a second Mercenary on order that I'm still waiting on that has the wasted grip option as well as a half wire. If I had that one up here, I think they would even look more similar than these two right here. But both are using a scent stopper pummel. There is some slight differences in the pummels themselves. The actual facets on the Albion are a bit crisper, whereas here on the Swordier version, they've been muted a little bit. They're a little bit more rounded around the top, and they do provide a slightly different feel. Both feel very good in the hands, but when I would grip onto one of these swords, like the Albion, my hand will slide down, but it definitely stops because this a bit more of a crisp edge on these different facets make my hand want to stop when it hits this point rather than continuing to slide off. Would be easier, and it has a bit more of a gentle slope to it where you could more easily slide your hand further down the pummel and maybe even grip the bottom half a bit easier than you could the Albion. You could do it on the Albion as well, but because there's more rigid and sharp ridges rather on this pummel, you'd be more aware of where your hand placement was. One of the other things I wanted to point out, specifically with the cross guards, is they are different cross guards. This one, if we take away the rain flap, you will see that there is a central ridge on the cross guard itself that is not present on the Albion. You see that central ridge a lot more on the lower and mid-tier swords than you do on the higher tier that tend to get rid of that ridge in most cases for this type of guard. At least it's been that way for all the models that I've currently seen. I would go on and talk about the blades, and I will talk about it very briefly, that they are different blade types based on the typology that they put forward. The Mercenary is a Type XVa, and the blade is representative of a Type XVa. And this one classifies as an 18C. I have thoughts on that, but I would say that it's at least an 18. And if you want to see the rest of what I actually had to say, I did a collab video with Jensen. You can find my portion that I provided where I specifically go into detail on the blades themselves over on his channel. There will be a link in the description, and there will probably be a link up here somewhere. Or, yeah, probably up here. Unless my aspect's off, that might be over there or down there, who knows. Look for the link, it'll take you to his channel where you can see his thoughts on the Mercenary and the Swordier blade, as well as my contribution to his video where I go into detail about why I think these blades, the actual blades, are different on these models. The last thing I want to talk about on these swords is actually the weight of each particular blade. You're gonna see on this video that from a size perspective, they are almost identical. I'm talking millimeter differences in size in almost every aspect of the blade, from the blade length to the blade width to the blade thickness. This is where the idea of copying comes in, and I start to wonder whether or not there's been a lot of inspiration. I'm not going to deny that Swordier likely took a lot of inspiration from the Mercenary. I'm sure they did. When you start looking at the actual details, you can tell there are differences, but they are small. They are minute differences between the measurements. And you can see right here in size, they're identical, almost identical in length. But the weight, oddly, with all those measurements, there's just something different with the Albion. The Albion comes in, at least my model specifically, comes in at 2 pounds and 14 ounces, okay, which is, for those who don't use pounds, I think it's 1.35 kilograms. I did not do that off the top of my head. I have notes. I'm not that smart. But the Swordier is 3 pounds, 3.15 pounds, that's what I have marked down, and 1.42 kilograms. The weight difference is there, and I wouldn't say it's considerable. It's not a huge amount of weight, but you can feel it in the hands when you pick these two swords up. One of the more interesting little anecdotes that I actually have with these particular swords, and you can take it for what you will, because this is pretty much a situation where it's my dad can beat up your dad.
I believe my father can incapacitate both of your fathers, either individually or at the same time. How many weapons will our fathers be permitted to use?
I brought him both these swords, brought them over to him, and I was like, so these are my two new swords that I have. Tell me what the difference is. He picks up both swords in his hands, and he's holding them and looking at them. And honestly, he's like, I kind of like the Swordier one more, and I don't really know why. I don't really have a reason. He liked some of the appearances on it. He liked the wrap on it. He liked the rain guard on it. And I was like, well, which one would you pick? And he's like, I don't know, they both are very similar. And then I told him the price between the two. The Albion Mercenary is a little over $1,000. There's different prices depending on different options you pick, but for all intents and purposes, we'll put it at the $1,000 mark. Whereas the Swordier version is a little under $300, so for sake of the argument, we'll do $300. And to him, someone who really only has a light interest in swords in general, was like, why would I ever pay $1,000 for this sword when this one is only $300 and I can't tell the difference? I think that's sort of the problem that we face in the HEMA and sword collecting community itself. What is the difference when they can't tell? I think we as a HEMA community, as we continue to grow, as a sword collecting community, as we continue to grow and it becomes more and more interesting to the outside world, we're getting a new influx of not only customers who are interested in collecting these pieces and practitioners who want them for the sport. We're starting to see more companies trying to jump in, but we're still a small community. And I'll tell you off the bat, I'm not fond of the drama that comes up here, because what really is something that bothers me is that in the end, whatever happens between Swordier and Albion, or Albion and X company or so-and-so and so-and-so, or whatever the case may be, when we're dealing with this, in the end, no one wins, okay? And I'm starting to look, especially as I've gotten an opportunity to speak with different makers in the industry, and I understand where they are coming from. I think of Peter Johnson, who does a lot of the work for Albion, and the amount of time and decades of experience that he has put into the sword community, the studying of extant pieces of swords that still are out there, taking detailed measurements, designing and doing all the work to create this masterpiece of a sword, to have someone then come in and take that design invalidates a lot of the time and effort and research that he and Albion has put into their blade. I want to stress this. Do I believe that Swordier did this? No, I don't. I really don't. Do I believe he took inspiration from this sword? Now, that's something I'm going to say, yeah, probably. And depending on what your level of comfort with that is, you're going to have to make that decision. But I do believe the swords are different swords. But when you look at the amount of work that was put into it, you don't want to see that happen, okay? Because here's the situation that we're all in. Whether or not you believe this or not, as a small community, we do not have tons of people knocking down the door to open up a new sword manufacturer. Really, we don't. There's a couple forges and they kind of go around. And to be frank with you, many of them are garbage. You've all handled different blades and you know there's specific blades that are garbage. Swordier does make quality work. They really do, and they've increased over time. They've done great models, and I actually have one over here that I'll bring over in just a minute. But going back to the argument of stealing someone else's work in such a small community leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth. If indeed you took more inspiration off of this than you probably should have, that's a problem because of the work and the effort that has been put in. Decades of work has been put into these swords themselves. And to have that taken by someone who does not understand or put forth the effort is when you're going to start seeing a mere facsimile that doesn't quite hold up, because these two swords do act different, okay? And one of the things that really sticks out to me specifically about these swords, and why I think Swordier may not have taken as much inspiration as some people claim, is if you look on their website right now, they actually have a sword listed, and I don't have the number off the top of my head, but you'll see it here on the screen in a minute, that they call a 15A. If you look at the blade, and I've seen some other sword tubers who have done reviews on this blade, I'm believing that the blade is the exact same one they use in their 18C. If I'm wrong, and I get a copy and it's wrong, I'll make sure I mention that in a later video. But from what I've seen of other reviewers, as well as what I've seen on their site, I believe they have taken this blade and they put different fittings on it and they call it a 15A. I can tell you this sword is not a 15A. Maybe they tried to grind it in, but essentially it's the same blade. It is almost exactly the same blade, so you can make what you will from that. But I do believe what Swordier is doing is they're designing specific blades and then adding the furniture in later. We see that with multiple swords. One of my favorite swords I have over here, that same blade for their SWM-1030 model is used on several other models with different fittings on it. And that's what I'm thinking is what Swordier is doing to create a more diverse catalog. And as I said in the Matthew Jensen video, there is a bit of lost in translation when looking at typology because they don't have the opportunity to handle existing swords that Peter Johnson of Albion has done, that Arms and Armor have done, and the people at the Oakshott Institute and things of that nature that have handled historical pieces. I don't believe Swordier has that experience, so they're trying to, as Arms and Armor put it, Nick from Arms and Armor, I believe, put it, the issue of making a copy from a copy, a replica of an existing piece or reproduction of a replica. This is the situation that I'm seeing Swordier doing. They're looking at swords that are popular in their market and with limited ability due to lack of access to these historical pieces are trying to do their best to make swords. And honestly, their swords are really good. They're really, really good. Anyone who has handled one of them, sometimes their dimensions are a little off. And when you handle a Swordier sword versus an Albion, there is a difference. You can tell the weight of experience and time put into the Albion blade is different than the Swordier blade. But does that make the Swordier blade a bad blade? No, it doesn't. The issue comes down, once again, in the small community of theft and stealing too many aspects of other people's designs. One of my favorite swords, one I did a review on, I have it right here. The Swordier SWM-1030. They call it a 16A. I don't believe it's a 16A, but that doesn't really matter. I had never seen this particular blade anywhere else. The fittings seem fairly bespoke to Swordier. I don't really know if anyone else has used them. If someone has, they're definitely a smaller person, smaller company, because I've never seen them before. This is a unique sword, in my opinion, from Swordier, and I love this sword. I do. I absolutely love this sword. It is fun to cut with. It handles really, really well. You've seen it on my channel a bunch, and it's a unique sword that I've not seen anywhere else. So when you look at yourself and you ask yourself whether or not the Swordier SWMZ-1004, their 18C, is too close to Albion, what do you do about that? What do we do about that as a community? Because I really only see this ending poorly for everyone involved. If we boycott Swordier because they steal designs or whatever company, what happens? The company goes out of business, and then we lose access to a sword producer. It's highly unlikely that someone's going to come in and fill the gap. Or what happens if everyone goes, well, why would I spend the money for an Albion when I can get a cheap knockoff? What happens then? We lose Albion, the pinnacle by which we pretty much judge every other sword. They go out of business. It only ends poorly for us. So maybe our best bet is, if we start seeing copies or something that feels too close, to focus on other models, provide feedback to these different companies and be like, hey, this is not okay that you're stealing this. Make it more unique. Do the research, do the work yourself, put out something that you can be proud of and that we can get behind. That's the way I look at it. I look at some of the other claims from, like Matt Easton and his claim with Kvetten. I don't want to see Kvetten go out of business. They provide us great stuff too. I like the amount of work that Matt puts into his stuff. The amount of expertise he has through decades of working in just the HEMA community itself. The priceless hands-on experience Matt has by handling actual antique, not replicas, antiques, is something that other people don't have. And through that experience, that hard-earned knowledge that he has, he's able to produce stuff. So if people are ripping that off, it can't feel good. And as a company itself, how can you take pride in what you do if you didn't do the work? Swordier, I don't know how much you took from this. I do believe Swordier did not do this anything maliciously. I really do. I don't believe that in and of myself, but that's just my opinion, and you have to go by what your opinion is on this whole situation. But I will say, Swordier, you produce good stuff that is unique to you. This is something that you can actually be proud of and something that people like. I mean, I've handed this to other people and they've cut with it and fell in love with this sword just because of how it handled. Continue to do the research, continue to put forward products that are of your own work, and people will rally behind you. And I really do hope that some of the different sword companies can speak together about these things. If there's claims of, hey, this sword's a little too close, that we can work together to provide options for everyone here. Because I do believe there is room for multiple different producers producing different things. Do I love my Albion? Absolutely I do. I love this Albion. Do I love this Swordier? Yeah, I do. I love both of them. They're both amazing pieces. And the price points are something I take into account. Would I take this Swordier piece to a competition? Probably not. Would I take the Albion? Absolutely. Would I try doing that new technique that with a hard target with my Albion? Maybe I'll practice with the sword that I can buy more of. This is the market you have. The ability to, I can have this sword that I can use as my everyday cutter, my beater, my whatever, when I'm learning new techniques and I don't want to risk my more valuable pieces. And then you take the years of work and dedication in these swords and the way they feel and use them when you are more prepared, better prepared to use them. So are these two swords the same? No. But are they too close for comfort? Well, that it could be.